everyone, welcome to the news desk here live at the Paramount Theatre in downtown Seattle. Rich Hagan alongside Big Z, Matej Zatlkaj. Welcome along, Matej. We're going to get into Standard. Now, there are so many decks out there. This is not like a typical Pro Tour where Standard is only just explored. Typically, we're 2 weeks in to a new format, Matej, and it's up to you guys on Team Eureka and so on, and Cabin Crew and the Pantheon to come up and define new Standard. But that's now in our rearview mirror. So what's unique about this tournament in terms of where it lies in the flow of Standard?
Well, I think Standard has been explored enough already. There's been a lot of tournaments, so it's firmly set out. These are your decks that you have to contend with, and you have to figure out which decks fluctuate, right? You have the ones that dominate for a while, then they get put in the back a little, and then others pop up. And if your deck is not well set up against part of the cards, the time for your deck to shine might still come, but ultimately it's very well set for like the top 6, 7, maybe 10 decks.
Okay, well, we've chosen 10 decks to mark your card for the next 20 minutes or so while the players tick down their lunch break and get ready for round number 4. So why don't we begin with a deck that I think is pretty clearly #1 on everyone's radar. Matej, it's Bant Company.
Yeah, Bant Company is the deck to beat. Usually it just means that, oh, it's probably the most represented deck in the room at maybe 15–20%. But ultimately, Bant Company is such a strong and powerful deck that players coming in, I don't think they would be able to afford to play a deck that loses to Bant Company. Even if your deck beats all the other decks but loses to Bant Company, I think it's a bad idea to come play such a deck. If you can't beat this deck, you shouldn't be here.
Right, so this is at the heart of the metagame.
Pretty much, yes.
All right. Now, one card I want to ask you about on there is Dromoka's Command. That's a card that we see there. It's like 4 Collected Company, 3 Dromoka's Command, 2 Ojutai's Command. There was a point where it was just 4 Collected, 4 Dromokas. And increasingly, those Dromokas are getting cut, and like 3 is about an average now, but there are some people who are actively really shaving those down, and some people even starting to run without Dromoka's Command. Why?
It's a powerful card, it's good, but it's only really good in those creature matches, and for a while there were quite a few decks in the metagame that just Dromoka's Command was not that great enough. For example, the Turbo Emrakul deck, maybe the John Delirium kind of deck, where you really didn't want to draw too many Dromoka's Commands, just because it just felt like they weren't doing enough. You needed to put on the pressure, maybe add a couple of other cards. But I think if the metagame, if the prediction I saw are true, I would be wanting to run 4 Dromoka's Command in this tournament. So we'll see how that pans out among the players.
Okay, so next up, why don't we take a look at White-Black Control. This is a deck popularized by Lucas Blahon at the Pro Tour. You see there a suite of Planeswalkers, 3 Liliana, 2 Obnixilis, 1 Sorin. And what else sort of stands out to you there? What's this deck about, Matej?
Just in general, it's classic control, you know, your discard spell, your removal spells, and just trying to get to the late game for some powerful stuff. The deck has been on a bit of a downturn since the Pro Tour win, but some people still can make it work. We've seen it quite successful at a couple of the GPs. But the thing is, this deck is not that great at adapting because all the cards available in white and black usually just allow you to kill stuff or discard stuff. And you can't really change your deck to do other stuff. So while a deck like Bant Company is very fluid because it's 3 color, you have counter spells, you have removal spells, you have bounce spells, you can really adjust it to your needs. A deck like White-Black is not as versatile.
Okay, that's odd because when you hear the word control, you often think, well, the later in the format it is, the better for the control deck, because the control deck wants to know what the metagame is, know exactly what threats are coming, and have all the answers aligned. But you're saying actually it kind of isn't that adaptable.
No, not compared to Bant Company.
Okay.
Which is the boogeyman.
All right, so that was White-Black Control. We'll stick with black. Let's take a look at Black-Green at Delirium. This is something that Sam Pardy was very partial to. We've chosen to put Grim Flayer up there, and that's a very powerful card.
Of course, one of the best starts in this format, especially considering how popular Bant Company is. And I'm going to be saying this quite a lot. I'm sorry, it's just, you know, the deck is just around and you need to be ready for it. Starting with turn 2 Green Flare into turn 3 Liliana is probably one of the best things you can be doing because you can turn on Delirium quite fast and while being able to negate what your opponent is doing. And this deck allows for some really nice stuff. Compared to like the White-Black deck, it's still just basically removal and just killing stuff. But it's versatile enough that you can adjust the game plans to beat some other decks in the format, even though I'm not 100% convinced about its performance against Bant Company, which might be a problem.
Right, so from your point of view, if you were stuck between Black-Green Delirium or Bant Company, you would straightforwardly play Bant Company.
Probably, yes.
Right, so from you're not to be convinced that Black-Green Delirium is the right choice necessarily.
Yes.
That's fine. Okay, so let's take a look at our fourth deck. This is Temur Emerge. There you see it. We've popularized Elder Deep Fiend on the right there for you. We managed to correctly say Deep Fiend and not Deep Fried, which is a good move. We see there, although it's only a one of, Emrakul the Promised End has given us so much entertainment from a coverage standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing of note for this kind of deck, that it basically branches out into two minor subtypes. Those are a deck like this, which is more like value with the one Emrakul that you can find with like Sanctum of Ugin, but there's also what we call the Turbo Emrakul decks, which run 3 of them, and they go really hard on your Grapple with the Past, on your Vessels, and Nissa's Pilgrimage, just trying to just play Emrakul as soon as possible, because usually maybe one is enough. We've seen more not be enough, but like once you play the second one, you're already in great shape.
Yeah, they call it Turbo Emrakul. I think we should just call that Big Grapple. That would be great, but well.
Works for me.
Okay, so that's Temur Emerge. Now, Matej didn't like the Black-Green Delirium especially. Let's see if we can tempt him a little with our next deck. It's Jund Delirium. So what are the differences here? What does that change of color give to us, Matej?
Well, first of all, you get access to Distended Mindbender. Basically, this is like a mix between the Black-Green Delirium deck and the Temur Emerge deck. They kind of do similar things, and it's like a crossover. But the main thing is that you want to do Distended Mindbender while triggering Kozilek's Return in your graveyard. This combination of cards is extremely strong against Bant Company, just because you're able to take 2 of their cards and while sweeping their board, and there's not much they can do, especially with the latest lists they have been running. And just overall, I quite like this deck, even though it hasn't been as popular, even though it did get some results, it's still a little inconsistent.
Okay, so I think you kind of expect that to an extent with 3 colors rather than a pretty streamlined, straightforward 2. So we go back to 2 colors now. It's going to be blue and red. Lots of different names for this deck. We're going to call it Tempo Burn right here. And who knew when we first saw the card Thermo Alchemist that this was going to be a mainstay of Standard? It's got limited 20-second card all over it.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, it can be a decent card limited, but here in this deck, it really shines through. And after Pedro Carvalho brought it to the front stage at Pro Tour Eldritch Moon, where he went 9-1 with it, it really caught on, and the deck started to be very popular. But then the downswing had to happen because all the decks adapted. People started playing Noose Constrictors to get rid of cards in your hand so you don't get hit with Fevered Visions, some more life gain, and things like that. So the deck, while it had a surge of popularity the week after the Pro Tour, since then it went a little down, and I'd be surprised if very many people played it this weekend.
I think also something strange happened there, specifically related to the Pro Tour, which is because it is a mixed format. In old days, if it had been all that format, then Pedro would have been in feature match after feature match after feature match. But because his draft wasn't that great, he was under the radar, he wasn't really in contention for the top 8. And as a result, that 9-1 deck list is the one that got found by people after the event, and it was like, hey, have you seen this? It was the Buzz deck coming out of the PT, because we just hadn't seen that much of it. So that was Pedro Carvalho with blue-red Tempo Burn. Let's go to a 3-color deck now. It's going to be Bant, and it's going to be Bant Humans. Matej.
Yes, this is a deck that actually existed before Eldritch Moon entered Standard, and the important thing to know that it suddenly wasn't popular at all. We didn't see it almost in any way at the latest Pro Tour, but since then, Brad Nelson brought it to the forefront at the Star City Games Invitational, did really well there, and I think the deck's back. It can do decent against Bant Company while presenting nice board states. You can be fast, you can be slow. It's quite versatile, but compared to Bant Company, it can really go big and wide, which might be important in a field full of Bant Company decks.
So if Bant Humans is sort of as wide as you can go to encompass your human net, let's go as narrow as we can. Let's go for straight white. So this is Humans again, but there's no green, there's no blue. What do we get here, Matej?
Well, this deck ultimately has one of the best early starts. This deck kind of keeps you honest at the start, because turn 1 Kythian, as you see there, turn 2 2 1-drops, so 2 1s for 1, and then turn 3 ones to attack with all your creatures, and Kithian can flip into Gideon.
Yep.
This is where the deck really shines, and it's hard to, if you keep a slow hand, this deck can really, really punish you very hard, especially if it's followed by Gristboon and Always Watching and things like that.
And also, if you're not used to reading deck lists, if you are a newer player, it's worth mentioning on there that there's this tiny little segment that says 4 Battlefield Forge, 13 planes. And that's it for land. 17. That means you are packing your deck with 43 bits of goodness, while other people are going, okay, so I'm going to sacrifice this to go and get the 3rd color there that comes into play tapped unless I've got 2 swamps on Tuesday. You know, there's something to be said sometimes for just how many spells can I get into my deck.
Yeah, that's what makes the deck fairly consistent, fairly good, because the deck's always going to have untapped mana on turn 1 and 2, whereas other decks just have their little Lumbering Falls and my tapped land here. Oh, I didn't get enough forest for my Canopy Vista, you know,
Right.
things like that. So.
Sure. Okay, so I think our next deck we're going to have a little argument about, because I've spelt it white-green Tokens, and Matej, I think you spell it white-green Angels. You call this white-green angels, right?
Yeah, there's a reason to this, because we saw at the previous format, green-white tokens was one of the most popular decks. It was basically this deck, but with the Eldritch Moons added in, people thought that white-black angels is going to be the premier control deck,
okay,
where the main synergy is with Gisela and Bruna melding together for Brizella, for a big threat overall. But in the end, it was the white-green decks that have adapted the shell with Thalia's Lancers, finding each, just to give them a better endgame, because I think that was one of the problems that with the new decks entering the format, green-white tokens had a hard time getting to the late game and actually finishing games fast.
For people who aren't familiar with that deck, how much of an afterthought is the 1 Bruna and the 1 Gisela, or are the 1 of each, is that misleading?
No, it's perfect what you need, because they work well so well together, because you only need basically 1 of each, and the games go long enough for you to find all of them.
Okay, it's fingers crossed time. We've got 1 more deck to show you, and we would love it if we were able to show you it in our feature match area in just a few minutes. We don't know whether we can. Meow. It's Cat Pact time. Matej, what does this deck do?
This is one of the most awesome decks to come from the GP following the Pro Tour, and it's based around the interaction of a Demonic Pact, which says you lose the game, but under certain conditions, if you give that card, the harmless offer to your opponent, it means they lose the game. And that's basically how this deck operates. As you see, there's no creatures, there's just the Lilianas as planeswalkers, and the main goal is just to close out the game, get the most value out of Demonic Pact, and then give it to your opponent for the end of the game. And it's a cute deck, it's a fine deck, but it's also much worse once people know what's up.
All right. My guess is these 24 won't be getting their claws out for the Cat Pact, but we'll find out. It is time for round 4, and that was our overview of Standard.